And welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Plek, and with me in studios, none other than Adrian Plekenpole. Welcome back, Adrian.
Thank you.
She is my sweet wife, ever present with opinions. We love her. And then also a special, very special guest, my cousin, none other than Senor Shane Loomis.
Hi.
All the way from California.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're joining us. We're talking about blended families today and something you've sort of become an expert in. And the reason why this is so important to me, as a pastor, I do a ton of counseling, and usually I'm dealing with blended families who haven't thought through any of the ramifications of marrying with children, people that already have children, and what that does to the entire family. And so I would love to talk to you just as a family law person, and then I want you to kind of walk us through some of the mediation that you've had to go through. So we'll just kind of start off right there. Just tell us kind of what your role is and what you do in California, but we are trying to recruit you to Texas.
I love it. I love Texas. I'm having a great time here. My work is really currently as a family law mediator. Mm-hmm. And so what I do, I think of mediation as a problem-solving technique.
Yeah.
With families that, quite frankly, I do a lot of divorce work,
right,
but I also do a lot of premarital counseling type work, and,
yeah,
and that's where this blended family idea comes from, is families that have children. You know, each spouse has a history and a background, and they're looking at how to bring their family together in a way that protects their children, that protects them, and to think about the things that come out of blending those kinds of families.
Right.
So.
Yeah, we're not like, there's no part of us that's like fans of divorce, or like we want God's intention for family was that it would be husband and wife and their kids and they never separate, but life happens and sin is prevalent, and so we have this reality and we need somebody who's a Christian in the middle of it trying to put these pieces together in a way that honors God. So talk to me about why you think that just specifically people that have blended families, they get married, usually they just do it. Why do you think that is? Why don't they plan ahead?
Well, I think there's a couple things that I would say to that. One is that I think you're right. I've never been an advocate of divorce. And in fact, you have an ethical duty when I was practicing not to advocate for divorce,
right,
to give ways out. But one of the things I think is terrible, particularly in California, but in other states, is that they create it as an adversarial approach.
Talk to me what that means.
So one of the things you do in a divorce, I would say to people, a divorce is a situation where you negotiate the terms of your contract at the end. You've already had the marriage, you had a set of agreements that you lived by, your marital agreement, your marital contract, and then you find out what the rules they're going to apply to you, which have nothing to do with how you lived your marriage. And the way they structured that is to say, spouse one versus spouse two versus.
Yeah.
That's a terrible approach to marriage. Always. It is never one versus
right,
the other. Or a family, right? It's not versus. And so I spend a lot of time looking at how can I protect children in this? Because one of the things people do when they're fighting, when they come to this and say, I'm going to take this marital pie, and it's a battle, who gets more of the marital pie? And of course, the attorneys are all, I can't wait. I want more of your marital pie. This is my money on the line.
Right.
And I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand what people were doing. And so I started doing mediation because it allowed us to say, husband and wife, we have a family. Mm-hmm. No matter what we do, we're always going to have a family.
Yeah, can you explain that? And tell me if I'm interrupting here, but like,
job.
I feel like that's the part where just because you're divorced doesn't mean that husband's not going to be involved for the rest of your life.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's very odd how we as a society, I think there's a balance here.
Right.
On the one hand, if you really knew what marriage was going to be, if I gave you the pamphlet and said, here's the deal, nobody get married, let alone have kids, right? Give up everything, the other person gets everything, and you're no longer important, right? That's what it would feel like.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not true, but that's how it would read.
Right.
And so it's good for us to be a little bit of a leap of faith into a marriage. On the other hand, to go in with no thought whatsoever, I'm just going to jump in that pool. The fact that it's a painting and there's no water, it'll happen, right? And we're told this romantic story that love will conquer all.
Right.
Love will conquer all, but it's not love that says fuzzy-wuzzy love. It's true respect and deep understanding of each other. And the next step, we get together and we have a child because that's what we're supposed to do.
Right.
And we don't recognize that what we're often doing is saying that love that we felt, feeling a little soft, if we put a kid in here, that'll feel good and we'll have it. But the kid doesn't have that agreement either.
Right.
The kid came in with two parents who were obligated to take care of the kid.
Right.
And often families will sort of align around that. They have an idea that we're going to raise this child. At the time they get mad at the spouse, they will start to say, well, if I just excise this person from my life, I'm going to remove them, everything will be better.
Right.
Because it wasn't good. I didn't fix it by bringing them in, so if I push them out, it'll get better. Well, the kid is still around. We still have Christmas, and people say, oh, until you're 18. No, not until you're 18, until you're all dead, right? We're all together, and even then, hopefully we're all joining up. So when we look at that relationship and say, this is a lifelong relationship with your spouse, guess what? Yes, dad is going to be dad forever. And that's a good thing. And to really look at that and say, I'm not excising this person. We're changing the structure of the family that continues, and the family continues always. So there are some very rare and unusual cases of horrific abuse. There are some very rare, but the vast bulk of cases involve mad. I don't like what you're doing. You don't like what I'm doing. I don't feel good. I'm out. Right. And those cases, in our system, particularly in California, we say, go after them, make them pay, get revenge, and you'll feel better. And you don't feel better.
Right.
What you do is you really scorch earth the thing and then have to go stand on this scorched earth and talk to each other because there's no way out.
Oh,
that's
God.
a terrible
It's like we're going nuclear, and then we'll all live in the nuclear
and then we're going to live in the
Holocaust
nuclear fallout, and hopefully it'll get better, right? And we know nuclear fallout doesn't last a little while, so it's kind of right. So I think one of the greatest things I started to learn in my early cases where I was working with families, and it's really funny when you take somebody, that person is the most awful, horrific, terrible person in the whole world. They're a terrible parent. They're terrible, terrible, terrible. How did you meet? Oh, it was wonderful. He was just this big, strong man, and I saw him working with children, and it was wonderful. And I saw her working hard, and she was just beautiful. And the softening that happens, we completely lose how we met this person, and we completely forget that 95% of this marriage was wonderful.
Yeah.
And that we had this, I'm not saying that marriage isn't stressful. Marriage is not ever in the Bible or anywhere else does it say this is a smooth ride.
Right.
That's not what it says.
No.
In fact, I think we're promised a couple things like persecution, pain. Let's look at these great people. And marriage is just like that, right? It is very, very valuable, and families are very valuable, but it is not a smooth ride.
Right.
And if we lose sight of that, we can make something that could be smoother worse by the nuclear option.
Right. Okay. So let's go to the planning ahead. Why don't people plan ahead? Some people are thinking that maybe they have a romantic belief or whatever.
They do,
and you've seen this.
I have more often than not. Particularly in California, we have a lot of third and fourth marriages. So, but in first marriages, a very typical pattern is the first marriage they get married at 18, and it depends on. There's a lot of variables here. I'm thinking of in a sort of middle class family range, middle class area. Most of the kids are likely going to go to some form of college.
Right.
Maybe not Princeton, maybe not Yale, maybe not Ivy, but they're going to go to school. And they're going to think of going to school to get some sort of a job that leads them into sort of a professional life. They're going to have a household with a family. That's what they're thinking they're going to do. And maybe they get a little frisky in college and have an accident, or maybe they get married at maybe 19 or 20. And they grow, right? They married this cheerleader, they married this football star, and they turn into an insurance salesman and a teacher. And it is not the same relationship that they had when they started. And maybe they didn't know anything about themselves, let alone the other person.
Right.
And so they can outgrow each other, which is unfortunate. If they're lucky, they sort of figure that early enough. They don't have a kid. They don't have a massive financial investment.
Right.
And maybe they get out. But then there's the marriage that happens at 25, 30, and I'm using random numbers, but post-college, have my first jobs, sort of have a little bit of
understanding of life.
Yeah, exactly. And they get married, and at 55 or 60, they're looking around going, I'm not happy. And they have now their houses together, their businesses together. Maybe they spent the inheritance that one of them received. All their friends are saying, let's be happy.
Yeah.
The problem was at 25, nobody's thinking, I need to protect anything because I don't have anything.
Right.
I'm about to start working and I really think I have a promising career, but I don't really have it. And they think that counseling or prep is premarital agreements planning for divorce. That is understandable,
right.
popular.
Yep.
And you think of every pop culture reference we have. Cinderella does not investigate Prince Charming, right? or it's.
I take you at your word because why would
I
you
didn't
lie
even.
to
I
me?
wasn't. I'm getting Snow White and Cinderella mixed up, but
Right.
whatever it is, neither of them spent any time getting to know who the person was. They woke up to a kiss, boom, we're married, and that is not uncommon to believe. That's not, and so we think of it as being unromantic or selfish or gold digger to investigate ahead of time, and I think it's the reverse. I think you owe it to your family to think about it.
So
ahead of time.
talk about that specifically.
Sure.
I guess your kids, and I think sometimes, especially if kids under 18,
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are still being formed, and then you're like, it didn't work with the first one. Now I fall in love with the second one, and you're moving forward. Tell me about like what blended families should be planning for, just when it comes to kids.
Yeah. So I think when I went through a divorce myself, and I was working very hard not to do all these horrible things that people do, and I get along with it's 25 years. We've been divorced, I think, for 10 years almost, and we get along great. And,
Right.
and it was common about my daughter. But one of the things you do, if you care about counseling, we use a lot of therapists in,
Right.
in California, and you go in and they draw these two circles, and the circles are overlapping, and they say, this is mom, this is dad, and this is your kid in the center in the overlapping. Every time you say something about mom, you're talking about your kid. Every time you say something about your dad, you're talking about your kid.
Right.
And all these feelings that you have towards those kids, you're mirroring what you feel towards the other spouse.
Right.
And so if you don't learn to love, not romantic, let's be, but love your ex-wife, love your ex-husband, you're never going to love your kid.
Right.
That's not going to work. With blended families, well, now there's 17 circles because we have mom and dad,
Yeah.
mom's mom, dad's mom, mom's dad, dad's dad. So we have the extended family,
Right.
and now we have insert new spouse and their parents and their ex-husband, ex-wife, and their children of the ex-husband's ex-wives. And so this, it takes a village becomes a whole other message. And if you don't love all of them, if you don't express respect and care for all of them, you are saying, I don't love my kid.
Wow.
How do you do that?
Wow.
And now I have to
Because I think it's hard to do that even biologically. For
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
absolutely brutal biologically. And it's brutal when a society says, go get them. Go get them. Take more.
Yeah.
I want a bigger piece of the pie.
So, like, as one who's not super familiar with a ton of divorces, tell me about that attitude of go get them. Like, I think I've seen that in movie portrayals of lawyers and stuff, but is that real?
Yeah. I think one of the things I've been talking about recently is when at the start of a case, this is an example of how we set that up. People believe, no matter how much I tell them, don't do this, it's awful, that at the beginning of a case, you go get a lawyer, you sneak behind the back, don't tell anybody you got a lawyer. Then the lawyer will say, well, the first step is we've got to get a petition filed. This is the first document that goes to court. And then we've got to serve them, give them a copy of it. And that comes out of a whole procedure designed for civil lawsuits where you hurt me, I want the money back. That's where it comes from.
Like a
Like a business versus a business,
Yeah, okay.
right? Apple gets mad that somebody stole their trademark.
Right.
So they file a lawsuit and they have to tell the person they're suing
Right.
that they're suing them, which is why we have this service component.
Oh, gosh.
So what they do is many times they will say, oh, he's going to sneak all the money away. The guy has no money, right? A lot of times what we're talking about is we have a house and we have a little bit of retirement money, none of which can be accessed.
Right.
Right. And they're convinced he's been putting stuff in gold bullion offshore. Well, maybe he has, or maybe she has, or
Right.
but that's not really what's happening.
Right.
And so but the attorneys get sued if they don't do it as though this is the most contentious, horrible, sneaky thing. And they will send a police officer or a
constable?
sheriff's department,
Yeah.
kind of thing, to serve him or her at work with a petition that they didn't know was coming. And what does it say on the petition? I want all the money. I want full custody and you never get to see the children. And I want you to pay all my attorney's fees. And I want you to pay every dollar to me that you have in support. Well, the person receives this and thinks, oh my goodness, And what do? They go hire the big gun to fire back, right? And they launch. Well, first things, the petition has nothing to do with the resolution of your case. I don't care what it says. I don't care if it says we're going to Disneyland. There is not one thing in it that matters to the outcome.
Really?
The second thing is, why serve them at work? Why would you ever want to put somebody on guard? Think about how you would say, I want to have a baby. Would you start by saying, I'm going to take you at work, make sure you're in the middle of a business meeting, and call you out. You want to have a baby with me? You would never do that, right? And so that's how we treat this. That's a terrible way to go. And instead, what I would always tell people to do is start by working together before. Can we fix this marriage? Can we do something? Is there something so broken that we have to end it, or is there something we can do to fix it? And if there isn't, we don't call this a end of marriage. We call it a transformation of the family, which is what it is. We are restructuring the way this family, which does continue, is going to
no
move
matter
forward.
what.
No matter what. No matter what.
Okay, so you said something in there like that I didn't, like 16, 17 circles, which I
Yes.
didn't.
Yeah.
That was wild. So tell me about like how, like talk about how when you're dealing with families, how you get them to like, I mean, I'm not sure if you even had to do this, but like, hey, here's your coach. How would you coach them?
Yes.
To siblings. Hey, here's your new brother. You know, he's 2 years older than you. You used to be the oldest child. Now you're not. Like, how do you? I mean, man.
Well, one of the things. Okay, so you learn a lot from how to do it wrong when you end the marriage. Right. What happened? What I do on the front end, there's a stigma that premarital counseling is somehow divorce planning.
Right.
I think it's divorce prevention.
Right.
I think it done properly with care.
Right.
And with intention. I love when people have a spiritual counselor or a psychological counselor or a mental health person. We are not doing this to divorce.
Right.
We are doing this to have these really hard conversations to prevent divorce. That's the whole point. For example, what some people will do, and it's very, I don't mean to be so critical, but I'm critical of anybody who doesn't try to learn.
Right.
and that is that they're selfish.
Yeah.
I want to engage in a relationship with this person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you don't get to engage in a relationship with this person. You are dragging everybody in your past into this relationship with this person. And so is that person bringing everybody into their past into this person.
Mm-hmm.
So you believe, I love her, I love him, therefore we are going to have a relationship. No. That's not what's going to happen. So one of the first things you do is, how are you going to introduce this new person to, I'm going to use the husband and wife because I just don't, if I'm introduced, the husband's going to introduce the wife to his children.
Right.
Okay. So do you say, here is your new mom?
Oof.
I mean, what are you doing? Right? And what, again, I said at the beginning, you have to love your ex-wife. Right. Or you have to love the mother of your children, however you're blended, whatever that configuration is, right?
Yeah.
So I really encourage people to say,
you're right, because there might be people who never got married but had
absolutely,
a kid together.
But it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Because the mom is the mom,
right.
is the mom, is always the mom, will always be the mom. So I would say, really take care. This is the first impression. Don't have potential interviewing moms sleeping over, right? And the kids see, is that the nanny? Is that the mom? Is that, who is that? I don't know. We're not going to do that.
And usually people don't even say anything. It just happens.
And
the kid's just like, I guess Bob lives here now.
Yes.
All right.
And then Bob moves out.
Yeah.
Right. Because so don't do that. You have an obligation and a responsibility as a parent to not do that.
Right.
This is not a model that we want to give to any child.
Right.
Some people will say, I got divorced because I wanted to model a healthy relationship and proceed to have the string of new.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
And I think people underestimate how valuable. I did. I hate to bring up my own stuff, but when I started dating, I dated a woman who had some children.
Yeah.
And a very difficult relationship with her ex-husband, who was still in the picture as a father to the children. And I had my daughter, and I'm going to introduce my daughter to this woman. And we spent a lot of, which side of the bench am I going to sit on? Which side of the bench is she going to sit on? What are we going to call you? How long can this meeting be and be okay? We're never going to do it at a house or a car. We're going to meet at a place that's neutral. I asked my daughter where she wanted to meet her. So she picked the most expensive restaurant she could think of, and that was the place we were going to do it. Yep. Yeah. And we sat there for 1 hour, not for a 3-hour open-ended conversation. No. Taylor, this is someone who I care about. That's how she was introduced. She sat on one side and I sat next to my daughter. Because for me, that was the right thing to do, to say, this is somebody I care about. Not ever, this is a new mommy. Right? No. There was a little older, but yeah.
So I had an experience. So my dad, he divorced my mom, and then 6 months later, I'm doing a judo tournament while I'm at West Point at the Naval Academy. My dad just randomly shows up. He's like, hey, the tournament's over. Can I take you to dinner? I'm like, yeah, all right, let's go to dinner. So we go to this dinner. He's like, hey, I want you to meet somebody. I'm like, oh, awesome. Who are you going to meet? He's like, my new wife.
Right.
And I'm like, no, granted, I was 20, so I was a little bit older, but still, I was just like, all right, cool, I guess. And it was one of the weirdest moments. And from that point forward, my relationship was always just a little bit like,
of course, it was
giving her a stiff arm, because I'm like, who the heck are you? And you came out of nowhere.
That's a very common mistake. You were 20 and therefore.
Right.
No.
Right.
You were 6 and you don't know? No, that's not true. So don't underestimate that, right? And I think what you said is right. I want this person to have a comfortable relationship with the person I care about.
Right.
But it's not theirs.
Right.
And so where they fit, I don't think there's a right answer.
Yeah.
So is this person, are we fully integrated? Are we, you have, my daughter's mother was always in the picture, was always an active mother, was always going to be part of everything.
Right.
So what's the next introduction you got to do? Right? This is not fun.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be stupid enough not to introduce somebody who's going to be around my daughter to my daughter's mother.
Correct.
Don't do that.
Right.
Wow. Okay. Because I think people just they're just like, no, I'm just going to tell them, hey, we're getting married. That's when you need to know. And I think you're right, because I mean, don't you want, if you have a mother of your child, you'd want the mother of your child comfortable with whoever you're bringing your child around.
We've had people show up to church with, like bruises, and they've been violently attacked by the girlfriend or the mother of the children.
Yes.
So I've seen,
right.
I've seen evidence of when it goes very poorly.
And what do you think's going to happen? I mean, one of the most impressive things I've seen, the other end, was when I, for whatever reason, I represented mostly women in the divorce proceedings, and it was divorce or child custody. And as you said, it doesn't matter whether you're married or not; it's the same process when you're talking about child custody. And the women will say, and it's an interesting technique to calm things down, she's better at parenting than he is. So I really like new girlfriend, because new girlfriend makes sure that my kids are okay.
Oh, wow.
She wants them to be fed a certain way. Husband will feed them, but who knows what junk food they're eating, right? New mom wants them calm and collected and having a good school day. And so she makes sure that they have real meals. She makes sure that they go to bed on time. She doesn't like them to watch excessive amounts of TV. Now, that's a bold move for a woman to make. That new girlfriend is a part of the parenting solution. But wow, is it powerful. We now have, one way to look at it is we got all these competing things. The other way to look at it is we got this village of people who love this child.
Right.
Wow. What a great way. They have new adults to help care for them.
So one of the things, and this is just, there aren't very many resources on this, which is why there's like one book. It's called Smart Step Family, and the guy's name is like Dr. Smart, which is kind of funny. Anyway, and one of the things he talks about is like the integration process is you don't come in as mom, you come in as like aunt. Not that you're an aunt for real, but like with the same sort of authority as an aunt, not the mom authority, but the aunt authority. Do you ever talk about like the level of authority with a child?
You absolutely have to. And one of the things that you'll see in kids is they often will ask, what are you? Who are you to me?
Right.
Especially, a young kid might ask, who are you to me? Meaning, what is your role? What is your authority? That's really what they're asking. And what people will say is, oh my God, my kid's going to be traumatized. No. What they're actually, even in a reconfiguration of a family, rename the divorce into an appropriate, in a reconfiguration, which is the same actual process that happens if someone passes away. We have a new structure. What kids really care about is that they don't have to be the parents.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, who's giving me lunch? Who's taking me to school? Where am I sleeping tonight? When you say to them, and they don't even care what house it is. They don't care if you live in a shanty house. They want to say, Mom's got this.
Yeah.
Dad's got this. On Monday, I'm going to Mom's house, and Mom will be there after school to pick me up. And on Tuesday, I'm going to Dad's house, and Dad will be there to pick me up. Once there is security and they feel safe, children can adapt to a lot. What they can't adapt to is, I'm not giving you any warning. Here's this new person, follow the orders, but I'm not going to tell you what her rank is and go for it, right? That won't. So yes. And I think that's part of the reason new parental figure, adult figure in the family's life needs to be introduced to the other adult figures in the family life, because the ones who are going to decide that authority level are not the children. That's where they need you to parent. So when we say, and I think if the parents can coexist and collaborate, one of the challenges is if one parent says, I don't care what time they go to bed, and the other parent says, I want a routine that needs them to go to bed at the same time.
Right. Usually what I'm dealing with is like I've got one family that has no rules and the other family has all the structure, and the kid is confused and uses one family against the other.
And that's where we are parenting in collaboration matters. Because one of the things that's funny is I remember Taylor saying to me, I really like coming to Mom's house because she makes this particular dish and she likes to watch this particular kind of television show. I love coming to Dad's house because at Dad's house we have a different kind of dish and he likes to watch these other kinds of television shows, and he has the fun bed and she has the warm bed and whatever. But she got this experience of both. And one of the things that I had seen is this, we're going to use them against each other, whether it's in a divorce or in a blending, It's the same thing, was a kid will often say, I want. And in mine, I knew it was going to be a puppy. And she's going to want a puppy. And if the dad says no and the mom says yes, here we go.
Yep.
And I worked with my ex-wife and said, look, she's going to do this. This is going to happen.
Yeah.
And we orchestrated telling her that the family structure was going to change. And we made sure that we knew that my ex was going to live down the street from me like a couple blocks. Now, this is an uncomfortable situation, but yeah, you know what? Your selfish interests are uncomfortable for your child.
Right.
So we're going to do that. And the first thing she said to us is, I'm not stupid. Of course I know you're getting divorced. Of course I know. And we're like, whoa. And then she said, but what would really help is I want a puppy. And I looked at Jody and said, no, we're not going to do that. But not because we didn't both empathize with her desire for comfort, but we were establishing that boundary.
Right.
That no, you're not going to use this against each other. And one of the things we had to say, and it's very hard, people are not sophisticated. If you tell Mom something, it's a secret, if you want it to be a secret, unless it's your health. And I will tell.
Yeah.
And that's hard because I don't want secrets. I don't want to not know.
Right.
And at the same time, when I trusted my ex to say, if something's wrong, if she's hurt, I'll know.
Right.
And if she's like, I like this boy in middle school and I've never talked to him, but he's cute, right? If Taylor doesn't want to tell me that, it's not. Jody needs to have trust.
Right.
With my, so yeah.
Okay, so talk to me then about hierarchy. Is that the going into the roles thing, or is there? Because I thought that was interesting. We talked about this before about just the hierarchy of, I guess, roles and where I fit and
where I fit. Yes, yeah. So one of the other interesting, the analytical component is people often get married without talking about what their estate plan is. And it's funny when you're starting, right, and you have $20 in your checking account and you're making $100 a week and you're thinking my rent's $50 a week and there's no estate. I don't own anything. I don't have anything. It's not going to matter. But it's not very long until there is.
Right.
There is some sort of, and what do those estates look like? Well, a lot of what I'm doing now is on the trust side, which is I've now got a blended family and we're thinking about inheritance.
What happens if someone dies?
What happens if someone dies? Often in my area, it's one of the top tier family member, a grandparent in that upper echelon thing starts with a lot of money, dies, and with Alzheimer's. And so there's this, who's going to care for each of the parents, right? And when you have a lot of children or a blended family where you have more children than you started with, right? And even when you just have two, if one of the grandparent, the parents are going to start to have issues, who's stepping in and what is their role in that? And what do you intend? So if you often have disparate estates, one side has a lot more money than the other, and maybe they have more children or maybe they don't, however that's configured. Well, if somebody passes away, it's not about who gets the money, which is the common disgusting shark eating the whale thing. I don't like that. But when we need to intelligently, intentionally say how we're going to handle this to cover these problems, then we've got to think, and there's a part where the person whose money it is gets to decide.
Yeah.
But if you don't engage the other family members in what the intent was, there's a lot of anger and frustration. If one of them took care of them, mom meant for me to be paid for taking care of her, and the other one says, you're stealing mom's money because you're close to her when she's having, that same thing can happen at any level.
Yes, and that is hard.
Yes.
And I think, and this might be where, I don't know if you can go into the specifics, but like, I think you shared there's a family, then one person comes in with way more wealth with children, and then someone with less, but also has children. Is that now they're one entity, and does every kid get this? I mean, like that seems like to be a weird thing to have to talk about, but I think what you mentioned to me is like there's a war that breaks out post death.
Yes.
That the kids now are battling because like how come so and so gets whatever?
And I think it's funny that that's a mirror of the battle that grows when they start. When you think about young children and there's a family change, who's making lunch, who's making dinner?
Right.
I don't want to be the parent. Well, as a parent passes away, I don't want to be the parent. So, all the siblings are fighting with each other, everybody's fighting with each other. And it's not so much, there are some selfish, horrible people.
Right.
But the reality is, I think most selfish, horrible things don't come from a deep-rooted sense of selfish. They have no models.
Right.
And we're not supposed to talk about it, right? What do you think is going to happen if we don't think about it and talk about it? It doesn't go well, right? We've seen this a few times.
Yeah.
Bible has a few references, right? So we have that. So I think I do have examples where there is a family, and I'm thinking of one in particular sort of generally, and the mother has been married a couple times.
Right.
One was a very short marriage at the beginning, one of those 19, wasn't a good idea. Then a long marriage who passed away, and then a marriage.
So like a bunch of kids with
a bunch, like 6 kids.
So we've got 3 different.
Well, I think it is. It's actually probably a 4th because there was one of the kids was adopted, and one of the kids is special needs. So it sounds like a law school project, right? How do I roll together all of the pieces to sort of put this together?
Yeah.
And then the dad was married once, had 2 children, and then is now linking up.
Right.
Okay. Well, there's a couple things going on. We got a special needs kid. We've got a massive disparity in income and wealth. The mom in this case has a lot more income and wealth. We have a mom also has a lot more responsibility with 6 kids, and dad has 2 kids. And one of the things, as we were talking about,
age range on these, I'm just curious.
I think it's like 2 to like 24.
Oh,
something
wow.
like that, right? It's some, right. It is the law school project. How can I make this complex and configure this in a way that we don't have any idea what's going on?
Right.
It's brilliant for that. So, I'm not using. I'm kind of mixing a few things together to get the idea across. But what they think about is if one of them were to pass from an estate plan. One of the really hard things, and this is a legal technicality, an estate plan often, and I don't want to speak specifically on any particular estate plan, is usually becomes formal and fixed at the time of death. A premarital agreement becomes fixed at the time of signing, and a marriage becomes true at the time of when you sign the marriage certificate, right? That's the effective start date of the marriage, which means that if you're trying to negotiate this stuff, people will, in a premarital agreement or in the course of their marriage, try and negotiate their trust. But if your estate plan doesn't become effective till someone dies, between the time you negotiate and the time they die, it may get changed, which makes it a very unusual thing that we don't. So there's a bunch of these tiny things. So
what you're saying is like establishing it from the get-go of what it is, that takes away the mystery.
It can take away the mystery, but you have to, and if you're using professionals to do these, they'll think about those timing things and the requirements and give legal advice to make sure you get it right. I don't do that part.
Right.
What I care about, what I'm interested in is when you get married, what do you think would happen? I mean, one of the great questions is if one of you wins the lottery, whose money is it?
Right.
Now, there's a California law, and it depends on whether you got married before or after this winning. And it's a really important case, but whatever. But I don't necessarily care what California law is. I don't practice. I don't do law. I do, what do you mean? What is your intention? What do you want to happen?
Right.
Because we can make anything happen that you want.
Right.
Most of the time, what most people think is that I go to the court to get the answer. That's that adversarial.
Right.
Me versus him, me versus her, whatever. And I'm going to go there and they're going to tell me how it's supposed to be.
Right.
Absolutely not. Right. Absolutely. That is a stupid. That's like saying I'm going to go to the checkout register at the grocery store and tell them how my marriage is supposed to work. Who won the argument? Right. And then we're going to tell them who has nothing to do with you and doesn't know anything. Right. That's not a good idea. What instead we can say is, what do we want to happen? So when you think about whether it's an estate plan or the way you're getting married, it's very interesting when you ask people if there was an influx of resources or an outflux of resources. If one of us got sick and couldn't work and needed a lot of care, if one of our kids got sick, if I'm the low earner and my kid gets sick, is it my kid or our kid or what are we doing here? And are you funding it or are we not funding it or how are we paying for that? It's unusual. It's uncomfortable. That's a very, but yep. Guess what? You did this.
Yeah.
You are obligated to do this uncomfortable conversation, right? And so, but yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to go to a different direction. Of you've seen this where a blended family comes together and the woman makes way more.
Yeah.
And then the husband has like he's fine, but he's not like killing it, or like is making as much as she does. And simple stuff that you'd never think would be an argument starter. Like, hey, where we're going to go to dinner, and how much we're going to pay for a vacation or whatever.
It's the 3-tier. Here's how it goes. We're going to dinner. Who's buying dinner?
Right.
Well, I'm the man. I'm going to buy dinner.
Right.
Well, we're going to the swankiest restaurant and we're getting surf and turf and we're going to find out how expensive we can make this meal and I want all the best stuff. And he says, well, I was paying for dinner, but
Yeah.
Okay, and then the next one is we're going to go on vacation.
Right.
And he thinks, all right, we're going to go spend 3 days at a campsite.
Right.
And she says, nope, we're going to Bora Bora for a month. Right. And how are we going to,
Right.
or the high earner. It doesn't matter which way it is, right? Then there's the third one if one of us dies, right? So, or no,
but usually
house.
if a guy is the more high earner, that's sort of traditional role.
But it's not. What there is traditional role.
Yeah.
But on a blended family,
Dad,
I saw this. Dad has this problem. I have my children. Anything I do with my new spouse is taking away from my children. So it's not me that I have a problem with. It's not the traditional that I have a problem with. It's my legacy that I have a problem with. And she or he, the low earner, it's actually bilateral. It doesn't matter who's who. We may know the hierarchy a little bit. We may know who's driving the bus. But we don't know. She's thinking, I'm marrying into resources that will pay for my family. And he's thinking, she's on her own. These aren't my kids.
Right.
I don't want it to be that there is a right answer. I mean, there is. I think if you pray about it, you're going to get an answer.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is very uncomfortable to say, I'm obligated to take away from my daughter.
Wow.
To give to the other one who I didn't have anything to, I may love them. I may be close to them. I'm not yet. Right. And I'm making this decision about for the rest of my life, what's going to, you have to think those things through and it's not straightforward. There is a tendency to say, oh, he makes the money. It's ours.
Yeah.
And there's a tendency for him to say, well, it's modern. Is it drizzle? Yeah. Right. So no, it's not hers. It's ours. Right. And we're going to, or it's mine, except for what we did after. I mean, a lot of guys will say, what we did during marriage is ours, but all this stuff from before is mine.
Yeah. So and maybe Adrian, you can speak into this a little bit. What I've seen a lot is it's people don't actually come to us for advice. They just come to us married, and they've already they don't want anyone speaking into any of this, and I think that's a problem. Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. And what's interesting is we were talking about this a little bit yesterday. Just how, a lot of our peers, a lot of our church, I feel like, I don't know if it's true that the church is typically like the age of the pastor, but it does sort of seem to be a trending reality. And so a lot of our church, it has been married in this 10 to 15 year range, which is our same range. And around this time, I'm seeing, you're seeing some people have had the same marital frustrations for really since day one. And there's this feeling of okay, I've known people to kind of admit wow, if this marriage could be over, a lot of times we're in situations where there has been some level of moral failure. So that's kind of what's that's precedenting the conversation. Right. So there's been some amount of moral failure, whether it's emotional, physical, whatever. And there's a choice to forgive and stay together and move forward. Or there's this this choice to potentially like be done with this
But
first
you're never
marriage.
done. Right, yeah.
And I think that for
Right.
me has been a really I've walked some people through these conversations, some of which I've been closer to, and I start to process with them. I'm like, let's just say you decided today, like, I'm done. I said, this is the father of your children, and
Right.
like the amount of working together that you still have is no less really than if we can figure out a way to like stay married and maybe fix some of these things and still have some of the benefits that you see and that you have. And so helping to kind of diffuse this idea that there's a problem to be solved by ending a commitment, it's really just not solving very, very many problems. And it might solve the problem of like, this person technically, I feel safer that they can no longer continue to hurt me. That's typically the motive. When there's been some sort of infidelity, it's like, okay, ending this marriage makes me feel like I'm safe from them hurting me. But that's really not, it's an illusion of security.
Yep.
Because they're still going to hurt your children. Their decisions are still going to affect you. They're going to hurt you. It might feel less direct. It might feel less personal. Maybe you'll have a distracting relationship that helps absorb, but it's not going to.
I like the way you put that.
Distracting relationship.
I think you're right, and that distracting relationship is really a good point. Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's true, and then you are justified in whatever pain you put your children through,
Right,
because that guy hurt me, or that woman hurt me. Yes.
And the children become this thing that is, it's like it's selfishness, right? They become second priority to the thing that you were most after. And so, thankfully, I think we catch a lot of. I feel like very few people that we've walked through this up to now have ended in divorce, but it has often been.
But usually we get the people coming to us
family.
with the blended family, and they didn't think it through before.
That's
they
right.
And that has been bad.
Now we're all of a sudden we're right in the middle
Yeah.
of their world, and we're like, how did we even get here?
And I think that I've gotten in a similar way. And again, I think they're more alike than people will admit.
Mm-hmm.
But in the divorce, where they come filed, even if you get to the very simple stuff, and part of the reason I think the premarital avoidance, a premarital agreement does not have to be a legal document to prevent for divorce. That's not what it is. What it really is let's ask those really hard questions that we really shy away from.
Nobody wants to ask those questions.
Nobody wants to ask those questions. What do you feel about money?
When you say premarital agreement, is this like a prenup?
Well, that's a great question. What do you want it to be? I'm a mediator, so I don't do the law part. I'm aware of it, and I work with a lot of attorneys, and I know it. But what I actually think is more important is not the legal effect of the premarital agreement. Which in California, it's really crazy because there's some rules about what people want to negotiate is support. And if you negotiate support, you can invalidate the whole agreement. They can just throw it out. So most attorneys won't do it because they're worried that they're going to send you this thing that says, I just spent a whole lot of money drafting this agreement that will not be enforced and won't matter.
Yes.
I'm not interested in any of that. What I think is more important is talk to me about, we're going to dinner. She makes a lot more money than you. She looks at you when you're going to go pay the bill, or she doesn't look at you and pays the bill, right? How do you feel?
Yeah.
How is your relationship
growing or not growing?
Whatever it is.
So you're saying have this conversation
on the front end
before you're married.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And would you say this is true first marriage or?
Yes.
Really interesting.
But I think it is tricky. I mean, we talked originally about why do people do this without asking first, right? Why do they jump in? And I think, again, those young marriages, they don't know anything, they don't have anything, and they're just not, it's sort of like I was talking to my daughter and she was asking something about what's a 401k plan, what's an IRA, right? And I was thinking about all the things, how do you not know that, and right, whatever. But you do
401k.
Yeah.
No,
but you do pick that stuff up as needed as you go.
Right.
You don't need to start with the full financial planning component, right? But you need people around you that support you doing that. And that's what a mediator can do in a premarital agreement or a premarital discussion, whether it's you decide, do we want an agreement or not?
So tell me about like the people that come to you. I mean, this, because when Adrian and I hear this, I think we think if you had a church family, like you would go to your pastor and the pastor would probably sit you down. And I'm betting a lot of the people that come to you they're coming from all over the place.
One of the worst things that can happen is the armchair attorney.
Right.
and the armchair attorney who's not your attorney but your friend.
Yeah.
Right. So
Lord.
and I find that men and women do this differently, but that's becoming less true. There's overlap. I mean, but there's personality types rather than gender. But where they'll say to their girlfriend, he wants me to sign a premarital. Oh, you should never do that.
Right. That's.
And I'm thinking of marrying this woman. I really love her, and we get along, and our kids are great, and we have you need a premarital agreement, right? These are not experts who have they may love you, they may care about you,
right.
but they aren't intending to give you the answer you should have. They're giving you the answer they think you want.
Right.
What's the pop culture? I mean,
right.
look at Instagram, right? When we learn everything from Instagram, you do not get quality advice that way, right? It might trigger an interesting question.
Yeah.
I look at the financial, it's the Dear Abby things, and it's for financial advice.
Right.
And it'll say something like, he wants to give me the retirement plan in exchange for the house. Is it a good idea? You can't answer that question on those facts. To do what?
Yeah, right.
Right. And so I think it is very hard to convince a culture that says, take them for whatever they're worth, assume their evil intent, assume they are not reliable, and start from a position of go get legal advice to talk about how it will go across if you don't make it.
Yeah.
The church families are a really good place
Yep.
to say, I want to encourage, and same with therapists. Anyone who says, I'm going to work hard enough to find out if I'm doing it right. Is doing better than the one who says, I don't care.
Right.
Exactly. Or I'm going to close my eyes and pretend it'll all come together.
So talk to me, shifting.
Hang on that. I think the closing our eyes and pretending it all. I think I would put that onto that an over spiritualization also, which I see a lot in the church. It's like we are gonna close our eyes. Like part of me, like 24-year-old Adrian would have heard this.
Absolutely.
And been like, oh, that's okay. We have biblical principles. We don't need any of this because we are going to be having this biblical marriage. And so our marriage is so spiritual that we don't need
any
practical advice. And I think, and here's what's interesting to me is that is ignorant. And what do I have to lose? I have absolutely nothing to lose. And so why am I afraid of it? And I think that those are good questions to ask. But I also think when I'm thinking about some of this from our perspective, like some of these questions, like our bank accounts have been meshed since day one. And so, but what's interesting is that was always a given. That was how I grew up. I didn't question that.
We didn't have to even have a talk about it.
Except here's what's funny is I've joked and not joked about in recent years of like, I want my own bank account because I want to be able, like I have these little random jobs
projects
that I like to do.
Yes, of course.
And I'll make some money and it kind of kills me. Like it's a lot of work and I don't ever want to let the home and kids and marriage fall. So I'm just kind of adding onto everything to make this extra money. So I'm like, I'm wanting a place for all that money to go that I can see what's there and then I can kind of frivolously spend it however I want to. And it's really difficult to like see that clearly when it's in this other account with everything else. And so
then I put it into savings or invest it.
Right. So I'm like, can I just have my own account? I just want my own account for some of this income. And I don't think that's an inherently evil, wrong thing. I think that's fine. But the solution is really you can do that within the same bank account.
I think that you're raising a very important question.
Yes.
And that question is, let's distinguish between transparency and implementation.
Yes.
Right? It is fine to implement it however you want.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The reason joint accounts can be useful is there are some technical reasons what you're trying to do can be useful, right? But the other reason is because everybody can see everything.
Right.
It is okay. And again, as a California person, I've met, I didn't know about some of the non-traditional configurations of families. I didn't know about sex clubs. I didn't know about alternative lifestyles with multiple people and those kinds of things. Excuse me. But generally, as someone in that, I have to be a little bit aware that that's okay. What I've learned is it is far more important that you are transparent and open and honest about what you're doing than what your configuration is.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't advocate that. Most people who come to me don't say, hey, this is the guy who knows how to do a sex club. It's not helpful. But I do understand. I want to have a safe place where we say, I'm going to be allowed to talk about something and not be judged by it. And I don't judge. It's not my life, but I don't care what you do. What I do judge very harshly is you are absolutely going to be transparent.
Right.
If you're not transparent, your marriage is doomed.
Yeah.
So I don't really mind whether people say, I'm going to have this side gig, I'm going to have this side arrangement. If a separate checking account is economically effective, go for it, right? That doesn't bother me. What would bother me in looking at a family who was looking about going forward is that they both saw it, that they both treated it as, is this our money or is this my money?
Right.
Do I have, and am I, the other side of that, resentful that every time I make something, it goes into the joint, and every time you make something, it goes into the separate? Some people, I know my parents had, everything we make is joint, and then siphoned into separate accounts, little amounts. And the idea was that they may have different importance of certain expenditures.
Right.
They like you were saying, there wasn't a lot of talk about what was joint. We pay the house together, we pay the whatever, we buy these things. But little things would be off to the side, and they felt that was some sort of I don't know the exact details of it, but I don't really care. My point is, they both saw the paychecks come in, they both saw the equal amounts go out, and then they didn't really, it wasn't that they didn't have access, but they didn't care what was going on in the other account, because they trusted and knew where it came from.
Oh, exactly. And I think that if I could, and I think some of that implementation would be helpful and is helpful. And I think what I sort of wish, if we would have done this back when we first were married, it would have given me an appreciation, like having someone ask some questions. Yeah. That I would have never considered asking would have at least given me some appreciation for.
Yeah, it's not like we didn't do premarital. It's like we had two different premarital, but we never talked about financial stuff.
He just said premarital in terms of emotional and spiritual, and so this is a whole separate world. But I mean, like every time, like when we go out, it's we have the same plastic card. It's not. It's like who can more quickly access it to get it to the waitress. But I would value that dynamic more if I would have recognized, oh, this isn't just a given. This isn't how it always goes. I have a husband who's willing to give me a card that accesses all of his earnings. I mean, I made nothing for the first several years of our marriage. So I feel like it would, if anything, it would have given me some appreciation for values that we just automatically did have that we didn't recognize.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so like you would have said, "Oh wow, this is awesome." We
do agree. Yeah, exactly.
And then when I wanted to be all grumpy about something, about how he spent, like he's so generous. That's always was struggle. I always struggled with that early in our marriage. It was a constant struggle, and I'm like, I might have been less ticked at how generous he was if I would have recognized that some of that generosity is coming my way and how he views the money he's making. Yeah. But if someone would have asked me some questions, because it was almost like he just got it. Our marriage got a 0 in my perspective from some of these mutual agreeing things that really were a big deal. They were valuable. They were aligning, and that was worth something. That was significant. But I didn't see it as I just saw it as like a 0.
And I think you raised a good point. What do I have to lose if I ask the questions? Mm-hmm. I don't think you have nothing to lose.
Okay.
I think what you have to lose is this relationship can't work.
Okay. Right. That is
and the problem is we see that as a negative. Right. And I see that as an opportunity to say,
we don't need to get married.
We aren't going to hurt each other more.
Right.
We can prevent, God forbid you have a child with somebody you don't feel on the same level of values with.
Right.
Don't do that.
That is so true. And you know what? I like to think that maybe that could have saved. Like I've always wondered, like, what if I got farther down the road with different individuals? It would have been so bad. But a conversation like that probably would have stopped it.
Right. It could have done both, right? It can actually, like you just pointed out, it can actually build you closer because you say, you know what? All these really hard things, we got this, right? Yeah. We're good.
Yeah. So I mean, what are you doing? You're in California. You're doing mediation with not everybody goes to church and loves Jesus, but talk to me about your own like spiritual journey and what took you from lawyer to where you are now as mediator.
Well, there's a couple pieces to it. So the starting place is, as a lawyer, I started really pushing towards mediation. Mm-hmm. And the reason is I was so frustrated with attorneys saying this is about steal the marital pie.
Right.
We're going to divide, because a marriage is so much more than the money.
Right.
Money is, and I think you've probably heard this a few times, that where I'm paying attention is sort of, that's where my treasure is, right?
Yeah.
And what do I want to focus on?
Where your treasure's, there you find your heart.
Exactly. And so when we look at money, it's not so much how much money or what do you spend on. It's what do you value? What is are you saving for a house? Or are you going on trips?
Yep.
They're valid. But you should be able to have a conversation about what you value, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of financial planning. There was a great financial planner who said something along the lines of, if people come to me and ask for retirement advice, and he'll say, "What do you want to do in retirement?" And they say, "I want to have enough money that I can do whatever I want." And he said, "That is the silliest plan I've ever heard, because what you need if you want to travel might be very different than if you're empire building or if you're trying to pass to your heirs. The way you financial plan for this activity is different." So I think knowing what you want. But I was looking at these things saying, I'm setting up a fight. And I win. I make more money when they get mad.
Right.
And we're going to do a bunch of useless crap that don't believe in.
Yeah.
That is about fighting. Right. And I make more money when we do that.
Yeah.
I make more money when we don't settle a case and we spend all of our time lobbying requests for documents that nobody has for 17 years that I'm never going to look at. I don't want to do that. I don't like it.
That makes you feel dirty.
It is dirty. I mean, it's bad. Right. And California enacted something called the Elkins Commission, which was intended to make it more. We want it more like a lawsuit, more adversarial, more painful. And I just hated it.
Yeah.
So I saw media, and there were a number of attorneys, high-quality attorneys that I had met in Ventura who were doing a couple things. One's called cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
Collaborative is a structure of settlement that requires the professionals involved to sign off that they can be disqualified if anybody tries to go to court. Mm-hmm. They're not allowed to go to court, is effective. And I thought, this is really a good plan. And so I started doing mediation. And so, yike, not go to this part. In 2019, I was in this accident. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about moral failure. So, and I crashed, and while driving drunk, and my passenger passed away. Mm. And of course, that disrupted my practice. And in the meantime, my father passed away, then my attorney passed away, the passenger passed away, and my practice had to be closed, and it was just one thing after another. And as a result of that accident, I went convicted of a felony and went to prison and did the whole thing to take accountability for that. And when I got out, there's a lot of precedent in California that a DUI itself is not a basis for losing your license. But California, for a number of reasons, California decided that wasn't the case with me, and they took my bar license, so I got disbarred. And during that same time, between 2019 and probably 2022, I did a couple things. I started in, because it's a long story and I don't want to get into legalistic garbage on it, but right. I started with 12-step programs.
Yep.
And 12-step programs, well done, mm-hmm. particularly with my particular sponsor, is like a Cliff Notes to the Bible, mm-hmm. right? It's how do we recognize that we're deeply flawed? Mm-hmm. How do we ask for forgiveness? Mm-hmm. And how do we process, that shame on a go-forward basis?
Yep.
And I simultaneously became deeply involved with my church.
Mm-hmm.
And I had what I think of as a mentor in my church. Mm-hmm. And he was talking to me about sort of the same, what does sin mean? I had a really difficult trouble with understanding the concept of sin. Mm-hmm. I thought of it as you're a bad, evil person. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to be sinful, but that's not what it means. Mm-hmm. And I started spending a lot of time in my 12-step with my sponsor and with my mentor, and volunteering and doing a bunch of other stuff to sort of find a way forward. Looking at sin as a turning away from God. Mm-hmm. That this is not a you are bad or good, but it is we all are born to reject what we're supposed to do. And what it's supposed to do is very taboo in the psychological realm. You don't say you're supposed to, but guess what? You're supposed to.
Yeah,
you're
right.
not supposed to kill someone.
Right.
You're not supposed to drive drunk.
Right.
You're not supposed to hurt people. Mm-hmm. Right. It is supposed to, right, in a very real way. But one of the things that happened was this idea of, but you don't get to check out. No. I remember for me, it was God saying, absolutely not. Do not crawl in the hole. Do not cave. So I had to come out in public and be present in spite of this sort of thing. Shame is really what it was.
Yeah.
And as I was doing that, one of the things I found is that, guess what? Other people have made mistakes and weren't completely rejecting of me as a human.
Yeah. And
so I also looked in my faith, and I started looking at this thing in the Bible that talks about not getting divorced. And I'm thinking, I may be off base here. If God's speaking to me and he's saying, don't give up, and no, and maybe divorce isn't exactly, But it also talks about peacemakers, and that we as peacemakers are doing things that save people, and that how we conduct ourselves attracts or distracts people. And so I started looking at how can I help people without destroying people? How can I prevent this sort of mass destruction? And so I started looking at mediation as a problem-solving technique, and mediators aren't required to be licensed attorneys. In fact, as a mediator, particularly in California, but anywhere, you are not allowed to give legal advice because it would not be neutral.
Right.
So I'm not required to have a license to mediate, and turns out I really like it. I really like working with people who are saying, I don't want to. If you want a divorce or a premarital agreement, or you want to hurt the other person, there are plenty of attorneys lined up. Tell them how much you want to spend, and we're going to get them hurt.
Right.
That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And the reality is that is a terrible way to live. That is not what I support. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
So mediation provides an avenue where I do the opposite. I say, we've got a challenge in front of us. We've got a grieving elder, grandparent, whatever, and the family is trying to tear itself apart because they don't know what to do, and they don't want to be children, and they don't want to be the parents of themselves. They want a parent.
Right.
Or in families who are thinking about mixed, blended families, how do we bring us together and build, not tear down?
Right.
If we're even in divorce, I still do work with divorcing families, but it's how do we transform our family, not how do we throw it out.
Right. I think what you said was really powerful, and I think one of the things that for me is like when I looked at my own sin, I had to say I am that bad, but God is that good.
Yeah.
And so when he goes to the cross, Jesus goes to the cross, he takes all that bad, all my shame, which is why I love, therefore there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And so not that you need to hear it again, but I need to hear it again, is that there's no shame on you. Jesus took all that shame off you, because the resurrection says, like, he took it all. When you put your faith in him, he saved you. And I think I confessed to one of my discipleship groups, like, I was thinking back to sins from 15, 17 years ago that still, it's like, time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. Actually, it doesn't. It just delays. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there one day and go, oh, and I was like, man, would you guys pray over me about this one thing from 15, 17 years ago that I don't think I ever confessed to anybody, that was just dark in my heart, because I am that bad, but he is that good to forgive me and remind me of the stuff that I need to bring to him, because he wants to take my shame. He didn't go to the cross for no reason. In fact, if he doesn't take my shame away, then he went to the cross for nothing.
Yes.
And I think that's the beauty of when I watched your life, Shane, I was just like so impressed by the way that you didn't run from your life or your past. You sort of leaned into it. And I really just thought that was really honorable of the way that you hung in with your ex-wife, then you hung in with your daughter, you hung in every aspect to try and do the most good because of what Jesus had done for you, and you didn't quit. I just really thought that was powerful. And I think one of the things that really moved me is, like, while you were in prison, you did a lot of reading of the Gospels, and it was transformative into your life, so that when you came out, like, you're more in a lost world that I don't get access to as a pastor, and you have ability to minister to people right where they're at to help them be functionally get to a place where they could probably most hear the gospel. So I guess all I want to say is I want to encourage you in that. And then secondly, like, how would somebody get a hold of you if they're going to, like, hey, I've got a mess. I'm about to get married. I didn't think about this. Oh gosh, that brought up a lot of things. Yep. And I'm in California, or I'm in Texas, and I'm going to move you to California or move you to Texas. Yes. How do I get a hold of you, Shane?
Sure. So there's two ways. Shane at shanefloomis.com is my email address. The website is surprisingly shanefloomis.com.
We'll put that in the show notes for everybody.
Thank you. And or my phone number is 805-494-7811.
Okay.
I love to talk to people. And again, I'm not a licensed attorney. So one of the privileges of that is that I can work with people as long as they recognize that's the situation.
Right.
I don't, mediation is a range of topics and people use it in a different way. My work generally involves two sides. I do not work with one. I'm neutral. So my purpose is to work with families that are working together. I want them aimed together at the problem, not me versus you. I don't work with divorcing couples on one side.
Right.
So
that's powerful. And it's like, I'd almost think you'd have to, like, counsel people to get to that place.
Yeah, and it is. One of the challenges is people will often believe, and again, I think this goes back to our beginning thing. Why don't we do this at the front?
Right.
They will say, I want a peaceful way, but she's unreasonable.
Right. we assume the worst of our spouse.
Yeah, and they think that they've judged themselves as being reasonable and the other person therefore is not. And often what that's about, which is really the point of when you said it would help me to have people ask the questions, it's they don't even know what the person's worried about.
Right.
They don't, like someone often in California, we have these very specific patterns. The woman wants the house.
Right.
Why do you want the house? The house is 10 times your income. You can't afford it. You haven't worked in 20 years as you've worked, but you haven't worked in a paying job, or you don't make enough money. What they want, just like those kids, I want to know where I'm going to live.
Yeah.
I want to know that I'm not on the street. I want to know that my health care is going to be okay and that I'm not a thrown away human. And most people, when they hear that, consider her very reasonable.
Right.
Even if I want the house was unreasonable. When we say we want a place to live, and we put two people aimed at that problem, there's some creativity. We can solve some stuff here.
Wow, I love the way you put that. I think of just some of the marriage coaching I've been doing lately. It's like when you just change the question.
Yes, absolutely.
Because when you take it away from a place of anger, I want the house, or you're going to take the house from me, and you go like, we both need a place to live. Oh,
yes,
we can solve that.
We
can solve that. Right,
yeah, we do. That's right. Right.
We had a good conversation yesterday about like helping people identify what it is that they actually want,
right? And
how people in general really do struggle identifying. It's like you want something like what you said it earlier. What did you say? What was your example? You said, "Oh, I want to just have enough money at the end of retirement to do what I want to do." Well. Or to do whatever I want.
Yes,
yeah,
do whatever I want.
You want to complete, like whether you want to travel, whether or not you want to sit in your house, like.
Yes.
And each spouse has a different idea of what they desire to do, and they're probably not the same thing. And so marriage is so much of working that out and figuring that out. And I think we experienced this recently, like when I was telling Shane yesterday about the cruise that we went on.
Yeah.
Identifying like what you want to do.
I loved it just the way it was, and you needed more friends.
Well, no, yes, that's a true statement. After about 3 days, I needed some more people.
Yes. I was not enough.
Yes.
I'm just like, I'm used to a whole lot of
awake?
social
I'm not sure you were awake.
But like but before the friends, regardless of the friends, like you are wanting a really stimulating activity all the time, and I'm kind of wanting a social, conversational vibrance, and those are different things. And so the cruise was everything that Chris was desiring in terms of like, here's a schedule where every 30 minutes or something different. And going into it, I don't know that he would have been able to say, oh, this is what I'm wanting.
Right.
But when we get there, it was very clear, oh, he wants to like
I
power
like schedules.
through. Yeah, whereas I'm
power
kind of
through.
like,
No, not power through.
No,
I like a schedule.
Yeah, schedule that has it moving every 30 minutes.
Well, in mediation, we call that position versus interest.
Yeah.
So my position is I want the house.
Right.
Yes.
My interest is in having a place to live.
Right.
Yes.
Oh,
and
nice.
I think you're right that there's a granularity, right?
Oh,
Chris can say I want a schedule.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you may
Thank
say,
you.
you know what? I'm okay with a schedule.
Right.
Not every 30 minutes, but I'm okay with the
Right,
schedule.
right.
I'll
And
meet
if the
you-
schedule is I'm going to spend 2 hours with friends,
Yeah.
I can really maybe do that.
Yes,
But you're
yes.
right. And it is hard to
Yes.
pull that out so
It
you
is
know what
hard.
you want versus,
So,
It is hard.
so let's say, Shane, someone doesn't want to get divorced, or could they come to you as like, hey, we need some help in our marriage that you've thought through all this stuff? Is that something you do with walking
It
people?
is. There's a boundary. I'm not a licensed psychologist or a therapist or anything like that. So
you could just be a marriage coach.
But in terms of a marriage coach,
Yeah.
yes. And in terms of people, one of the things that's very, very common, and I think this is your point, we want an investment property. He won't put the down payment. Well, that is a problem that is more technical, and
Yes.
it's lack of communication. What they really mean is we have this idea that we want to do something and we don't know how.
Right.
I'm really good at bringing people together to say, let's figure out how to solve this problem.
Yes.
So yes, in that context.
That's great.
If we're talking about your true mental health, I would have to refer you to a therapist
Right.
and say, but when it comes to that, we want to solve a problem together, and
Right.
we don't know how to bring ourselves to. I love that kind of work.
Well, and I think many couples need help because they feel like the how, the differing the differing opinions on the how feel so threatening
It
to
does.
the marriage, and it feels threatening to intimacy. It feels threatening to everything. When in reality, it's like you
want the same
agree on
thing.
the
Yeah.
same end goal. And that was kind of like this cruise example is silly, but it was like I had to keep opening. We had to keep having conversations of like,
Yes.
okay, really, we just want to hang out and enjoy each other. So if this means I'm going to go stand behind him at the blackjack table for an hour, it really is fun. And I'm going to just hope that there's another wife doing the same thing so I can talk to somebody. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But it's like all of a sudden the how quit being so emotional and so volatile, which on the cruise, of course, it's not that way. But in our regular life, it is that way a lot of times. The how feels like the end of the world.
It does.
And coming to a third party to solve the how feels like, oh, well, this is just because we can't negotiate on our own. Well, we can't, actually. We've made the how such a big deal that we're not able to acquiesce because we feel disrespected when we try.
But if you think of anybody who's learning how to brainstorm,
Yeah.
and the first thing the committee does is shoot down every idea
Oh,
because
yeah.
it can't happen,
Yeah.
I feel
and
like
you
that's
learn
my
that
marriage.
effective brainstorming is not that. That it's more about opening the door to it.
Yes.
It is a skill.
Yeah.
The goal is not to say I go to somebody every time I have a disagreement that I don't know how to fill out.
Right.
The goal is to learn how to turn these disagreements about how
Yeah.
into discussions about what is the real goal here,
Nice.
and let's brainstorm and let's learn how to do that in a way. So I think to your
Mm-hmm.
point, yes, it is kind of feels like, do we have to ask somebody for help every
Yeah.
time? No, but we do have somebody who's teaching us how to do it
Yes.
so that we don't do that.
Yeah.
Right. That
And
we don't have to
admitting
do
like
that.
we're not able to do that on our own.
Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
we
yeah,
need
exactly.
to learn
Absolutely,
because I
you need to
really,
learn.
because I think what happens is if you don't eventually go to the third party, you get very resentful because one
Yes.
person probably is constantly like
Conceding the
surrendering.
point.
Yes,
Yeah,
every
yeah.
time. And then the person getting their way might actually not be hitting what they desire very efficiently, even though they think that they are.
That's
but
right.
Because they've shut off any other options or opinions
Yep,
or perspectives. And so I really do feel like I think your counseling of other couples has helped us because I think it kind of bleeds over. Like we're forced to practice some of those principles. But I think in marriages where there's less analyzation of relationship all the time, I think it's just coming to a third party and asking questions, even when you know a lot, is still not a bad idea.
And I think that ends up being, we might get better at this.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
The worst case
Yeah.
scenario there is not that I don't like it, but that maybe I get a little bit better at it or nothing happens.
Right.
Right. And I think you're right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for watching. Listen, if you got any questions, you can text it at 737-231-0605. I would love to bring Shane back, as always, to just maybe create more conversation about what blended families look like or what really family mediation is. Love that. So if you have any questions, just text us. We talk faith, culture, everything in between. And so from our house to yours, have an awesome week of worship.